You know what's wild? Every other headline screams about millennials ruining something, killing industries, destroying traditions, demanding participation trophies. But nobody actually stops to ask why this generation turned out the way they did. Generation Y, millennials, born roughly between 1981 and 1996. They're your coworkers who won't stop talking about their mental health, your younger siblings who seem oddly idealistic for people drowning in debt. The generation that was told they were special, then discovered the world had other plans. And here's what nobody tells you. Their psychology isn't about entitlement or laziness. It's about betrayal. Deep, systematic betrayal by every institution they were taught to trust. Millennials were the most parented generation in modern history. Picture this. It's 1995. You're 10 years old and your mom knows exactly where you are at all times. She's driven you to soccer practice, scheduled your playdate, and will be picking you up in exactly 90 minutes. Your childhood isn't freedom, it's a carefully curated schedule. Studies from the Journal of Child and Family Studies show that by the late 1990s, children's unstructured free time had decreased by 50% compared to previous generations. That constant supervision did something profound. It created a generation that learned their worth through external validation rather than internal discovery. When you're never alone, you never learn who you are by yourself. You learn who you are through the mirror other people holds up. Teachers praised effort over outcome. Parents celebrated every small achievement. Everyone got a trophy, not because millennials demanded it, but because adults decided self-esteem was the key to success. Psychologically, this created what researchers call contingent self-worth, where your value is perpetually tied to achievement and approval. Your brain never got to rest in the simple fact of existing. It always had to be doing, achieving, proving. But here's where it gets brutal. Millennials were raised on a promise that turned out to be a lie. Work hard, go to college, get a good job, buy a house, build a stable life. That's what every adult told them. That's what every sitcom and movie reinforced. So they did exactly what they were told. They became the most educated generation in history. They took on massive student debt because everyone said it was an investment. They followed the rules perfectly. And then 2008 hit. The oldest millennials were just entering the workforce, or a few years into their careers, when the economy collapsed. They watched their parents lose homes, lose jobs, lose retirement savings. Companies that had promised stability vanished overnight. The job market that was supposed to welcome their college degrees offered unpaid internships instead. Economic research from the Federal Reserve shows that millennials who graduated during the recession earned 20% less in their first decade of work compared to those who graduated just a few years earlier. That wage gap doesn't close, it compounds. So yeah, economists might call it financial insecurity, but millennials just call it getting screwed. It's not that they're entitled, it's that they were promised one reality and delivered another. They played by the rules, and the rules changed halfway through the game. Nobody asked them if that was fair. This economic betrayal created a generation that questions everything. Why should they be loyal to companies that lay off employees via email? Why should they sacrifice their mental health for jobs that won't provide stability? Why should they prioritize work over experiences when retirement seems like a fantasy anyway? They're not lazy. They're rationally responding to incentives that no longer exist. And let's talk about social media, because this is where millennial psychology gets really complicated. They were the guinea pigs, the first generation to grow up with the internet, to have their adolescence documented online, to build identities in digital spaces. The oldest millennials remember life before social media. The youngest never knew a world without it. But all of them went through their formative years figuring out identity in public. Developmental psychologists emphasize that identity formation happens during adolescence and early adulthood. Millennials form their identities while simultaneously performing them for an audience. Every mistake, every awkward phase, Every bad opinion was potentially permanent and public. Research published in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology found that social media use correlates with increased anxiety and depression, particularly for the generation that adopted it during crucial developmental periods. This created a psychological split. Millennials crave authenticity but feel compelled to curate. They want genuine connection but communicate through filters and carefully crafted posts. They see through the performance but can't stop performing. It's exhausting. And they know it's exhausting. That's why they talk about it constantly. Because here's the thing about millennials that drives older generations crazy. They talk about everything. Their feelings, their struggles, their mental health, their trauma. Gen X thinks it's oversharing. Boomers think it's weakness. But for millennials, talking about it is survival. They grew up being asked how they felt. They were encouraged to express themselves. Therapy wasn't shameful, it was self-care. So when work crushes them, when debt suffocates them, when anxiety paralyzes them, they don't suffer in silence. They name it, share it, and try to find others who understand. This openness isn't narcissism. It's a collective processing of collective trauma. When an entire generation is struggling, silence doesn't help. Talking does. Finding out you're not alone does. Building communities around shared pain does. Millennials have a complicated relationship with work that confuses everyone around them. They'll work 80-hour weeks for a startup they believe in, but refuse to stay late for a corporation they don't. They'll pour energy into side hustles and passion projects while doing the bare minimum at their day job. This isn't inconsistency. It's a defense mechanism. They watched their parents give everything to companies that felt nothing when those parents were let go. They learned early that loyalty flows one direction, from employee to employer, never back. So they recalibrated. If companies won't be loyal, why should they? If hard work doesn't guarantee stability, why not work hard on things that actually matter to them? This created what organizational psychologists call a portfolio career approach. Multiple income streams, multiple identities, multiple projects. Not because millennials can't focus, but because they learn that putting all your eggs in one basket is how you end up with broken eggs and no breakfast. They're hedging against a system that's already failed them once. And there's this weird paradox at the center of millennial psychology. They're simultaneously the most hopeful generation and the most anxious. They believe they can change the world, that their voice matters, that progress is possible. But they're also convinced climate change will destroy everything, that they'll never afford homes, that the systems are too broken to fix. This isn't contradiction, it's trauma response. When you're raised to believe you're special, then thrown into a world that treats you as disposable, you end up holding opposing truths at once. You have to believe change is possible, because otherwise, what's the point? But you also can't fully trust that belief, because trust has been weaponized against you before. Millennials face serious housing insecurity that previous generations didn't experience at this scale. They're delaying marriage, delaying children, delaying every traditional milestone, not because they don't want those things, but because the economic foundation required to build them doesn't exist. They're not killing industries for fun. They're making rational choices with limited resources. Skip the expensive wedding. Put that money toward rent. Skip the cable package. That's student loan payments. Skip buying a house, because who has a down payment? Research from the Urban Institute shows that millennial homeownership rates are significantly lower than previous generations at the same age, even when controlling for education and income. They're not choosing to rent forever. They're stuck in a system where wages haven't kept pace with housing costs for decades. And let's address the elephant in the room: participation trophies. The thing everyone loves to blame for millennial psychology. Here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. Millennials didn't ask for participation trophies. Adults gave them participation trophies. Millennials were children. They didn't design the system. They just existed in it. Blaming them for the choices adults made is like blaming a plant for the quality of soil it was grown in. But those trophies did do something. They created a generation that understands praise can be empty, that recognition doesn't always mean achievement, that sometimes people tell you what you want to hear rather than what you need to know. So millennials learn to look for authenticity, to question surface-level praise, to seek genuine feedback, even when it hurts. Millennials tend to struggle with what psychologists identify as delayed adulthood syndrome, not because they're immature, but because traditional markers of adulthood, stable job, owned home, financial independence, family, have become increasingly unattainable. Studies in Emerging Adulthood Journal show that millennials report feeling in between, neither adolescent nor fully adult, well into their 30s. This creates identity confusion and anxiety that previous generations didn't experience at this scale or duration. They process information differently than any generation before them. They grew up as the internet evolved from dial-up curiosity to omnipresent necessity. They remember researching with encyclopedias, but prefer Wikipedia. They can deep dive into niche topics at 2 a.m., but also skim headlines while scrolling endlessly. Cognitive scientists call this fluid information processing, constantly shifting between deep focus and surface scanning based on immediate needs and diminishing attention capacity. The truth is, millennials might be the last generation that remembers analog childhood, but lives digital adulthood. They're not better than other generations, just different, shaped by promises that shattered, institutions that failed, and technology that changed everything. They're the transition generation, and transitions are messy, uncomfortable, and never appreciated in the moment. They're doing the work, trying to fix systems they didn't break, fighting for changes they might never benefit from, hoping desperately that speaking up matters, while terrified it won't. And maybe that's the most millennial thing of all, believing in better while preparing for worse. Now, if you think millennial psychology is complex, wait until you see what's happening with Gen Z. The generation that never knew a world without smartphones, that turned activism into an aesthetic, that's rewriting the rules on identity, work, and what it means to be human in a digital age. Their psychology is something else entirely, and we're breaking it down in the next video. If this resonated with you, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.